On a more positive note, we can talk about some protective factors or buffers, things that decrease the likelihood of a substance abuse problem developing. I wanted to, leave this section saying that not everybody who drinks or uses substances is going to have a problem. We've already been talking about it, but I just was talking about the risk factors. So the following 6 points are some key factors that have been associated with again protecting us from substance abuse issues in the research. The first one is having good mental health. So for individuals who show lower levels of internalizing and externalizing problems, they're less likely to have a substance abuse problem. Now, partly good mental health is coming from genes, but also it could be something that if this individual is seeking treatment for their mental health issues, then overall they could have good mental health and be protected against a substance abuse issue. For individuals who have high self-esteem, so they have just positive views about themselves, also less likely to develop a substance abuse problem. Individuals who are really focused on school, so those who are engaged in school but also are having, success and achieving a lot, it tends to be the case that they're less likely to have substance abuse issues as well. Part of it is that they might feel a sense of community at their school, a sense of pride, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of like thinking about the future. And for those reasons and more, this could lead them to be less likely to dabble in drugs and or alcohol, and definitely dabble in those things at the level of abuse. Close family relationships are protective factors, and this is in the same way that we already talked about as in the opposite way as being a risk factor. The idea here is that if we have parents who and other family members who are supportive of us, who are monitoring us, who are accepting of us, all of these things are going to lead us to have high self-esteem, so those are connected, but also to have better self-regulation skills. And this is ultimately allowing us to make, in some cases at least, better decisions related to life broadly, but including related to substance use more specifically. There's also a link between being a religious person and not just having those beliefs, but actually being involved in a religious organization and a decreased likelihood of engaging in substance use issues. And part of this comes down to that issue of context. Is this something that is tolerated? Is this something that is praised? And in many religious communities, substance abuse isn't, or substance use, I should say, isn't necessarily praised. And so we see a link there too. This is not an exhaustive list of all of the protective factors. These are just some of the more common factors in adolescence and also in adulthood, but here specifically in adolescence. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about a different psychosocial problem that could potentially emerge more in adolescence. If you are interested in learning more about mental health, I have two broad suggestions for you. One, the textbook does talk about mental health issues beyond just depression, which is what I'm going to be talking about now in adolescence. But if you're really interested in these topics, we do offer a course called Psych 224, which is psychological disorders, which goes into a lot of detail in how somebody is diagnosed with one of these disorders. That one won't be specific to adolescents, but when we know about mental health broadly, a lot of mental health issues start to emerge in adolescence. Not to say that there aren't earlier signs, again, taking the developmental model, but when we're first able to diagnose these things tends to be in adolescence. That said, let's talk a little bit about depression in adolescence. Depression isn't a topic that you guys are entirely unfamiliar with because it is a topic we're talking more and more about in society, and this is a great thing. It used to be the case, and not to say it isn't in certain circles, but it used to be the case where it was considerably more taboo, where people weren't encouraged to talk about how they were feeling, or mental health wasn't viewed as something that was real. What we do know about depression today is that it's one of the most common, or it is the most common psychological disturbances in adolescence. And it involves symptoms that are emotional, physical, cognitive, and motivational. So in terms of emotional, less enjoyment than one used to have. Physical oftentimes has to do with energy, sleep. Cognitive, this aspect of hopelessness is particularly common, or feeling like you don't want to burden other people. Motivational, this having issues with just making yourself do things that once brought you joy, or just doing things that you need to do in order to survive day to day. We see, based on the research, an increase in depressive feelings around the time of puberty. This isn't for every individual, and note that this does not say an increase in depression. So you can have symptoms without actually having a diagnosis of depression, and that doesn't mean that those symptoms aren't still negatively affecting your life. You don't need a diagnosis for those symptoms to be problematic. We also tend to find that females are more likely to suffer from depression than males. And as far as the research goes right now, we don't fully understand why that's the case. And it is something that we still see in adulthood as well. So in 2014, you see data from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And in this particular study, I know that this is 6 years old now, but the data, I can't remember if they haven't put out new data on this yet or not, but the data is not going to look that different today. So, and in fact, it might be even higher just for the fact that it is becoming less taboo, even in the past 6 years. So in this nationally representative data set, they found that about 30% of high school students reported that they were so sad or hopeless that they stopped engaging in usual activities. So for these individuals, I would imagine that it's the case that they see a marked difference between what they once did and what they feel like they're capable of doing now. But you see that only 8% met the DSM, so our diagnostic and statistical manual criteria during the past year. So even though we have a large percentage of individuals who are saying that my symptoms are negatively affecting me, not all of those people are meeting criteria for a full-blown diagnosis. There are estimates at how many people experience a bout of depression by the age of 18. You say this is roughly 15%. I won't test you on that specific number because it's going to vary from sample to sample, but just know that it is quite common for individuals to have a diagnosis of depression and/or experience those symptoms. 15% may seem like a lot to you or may not seem like a lot to you, but when we're looking at all adolescents, I mean, that is a sizable number. Lastly, I wanted to talk about some of the causes of depression, and there is still a lot that we have to learn in this area. And part of that comes down to it's complicated, but we do know that there's a genetic component or a biological predisposition. There are some individuals who are just more sensitive to stress and to life. And so depending on their environment, if they're in an environment which is particularly stressful or hard, that these symptoms of depression can come out. There also are individuals who have a harder time just regulating emotions. And so when negative emotions just emerge in all of us, some of us are just better at, I don't know, changing our thought patterns or thinking about it in a different way. But for some people, that's just not something that they can easily do. I am 100% not saying that individuals who have these negative thoughts should be able to just push it out of their way. This is something that it might be out of our control. We know that depression can run in families because of these biological predispositions. And again, it doesn't mean that everybody has to have a diagnosis. These symptoms can be problematic even if that diagnosis isn't met. We also know that depression can be environmental. It's more common in families that have a lot of conflict or who don't see eye to eye or get along very well. We see that individuals who are in these environments are coming from divorce situations, are more likely to get divorced, those kinds of things as well. Depression is also more common in adolescents who are having social issues, so issues with being unpopular or not knowing how to connect with peers or with friends, or who also have depressed friends. Then you're talking about it a lot with them, and this could change the way that you think about your own emotions and how you're feeling. It's this aspect of ruminating potentially that could be a risk factor. It's not necessarily the only risk factor, and this is also following an additive model in a lot of ways. So just keep that in mind. And as I talked about with the genetic component being more sensitive to stress, well, where do we get our stress from? It's often from our environment. So in individuals who have a more stressful environment, this could be financial, this could be family related, this could be peer related, and so on, then depression is more likely. Again, just for the sake of time, I'm only talking about depression a little bit, but there is more information out there. If you are somebody who finds yourself struggling with depression, I really encourage you to reach out. Reach out to family members and friends, but also to the counseling center on campus and or to other people around you to just get the help that you need. Even if you don't have a full diagnosis, this could be really beneficial to you. So next topic, emerging adulthood.